Joshua Berry, still haven't moved. When I started coming up and talking in front of you guys about a year ago, a lot of what I had spoken about was more informative and educational about what's going on in our town. And so I'd like to tonight kind of go back to those roots. And as you know, we've been doing this pay-to-play reform ordinance under initiative and referendum. And thanks to, well, I'm not saying thanks, but because of the low voter turnout, we got the signatures. It's going to happen. So because of that, we've been spending a lot of time reading the Faulkner Act. If you're not familiar with this, this is also called the Optional Municipal Charter Act, which is essentially the constitution for our town. It talks about how we're on, etc. For those of you up there, how many of you are experts in this or fluent in it at least?
Expert?
I wouldn't say expert, but at least have read it and are familiar with the provisions in it.
I am.
Okay.
Plan B of the Faulkner Act.
Right. So, but who is our expert? Is that you, Mr. Carlamere? If we have questions, are you the one who...
I always hesitate calling myself an expert, but I'm familiar with the Faulkner Act, or the optional form of government, modern form of government that this township follows.
Well, I have to assume that as our solicitor, if there's one person in this town who knows it, it's got to be part of the job. So one of the things that I found going through this, sections 163 and 164, and I realize that none of you know this by section number, but these deals with conflicts of interest of public personnel, both appointed, elected, and hired, etc. And to summarize them, it's actually two sections, but there's 3 points in them. The first is that no one can have any interest in a company that does business with the town, right? So for example, Mr. Hutchinson, you can't start a lawn mowing company and get a lawn mowing contract. The second point says that no one associated with the town can have either work for or get the profits from a list of forbidden companies. They actually enumerate what industries these are. Some of them are arcane, but one example is a railroad. Now, we don't have a railroad coming through Gloucester Township, so I'll use that as one example. For example, I'll pick up Mr. Hutchinson again. You couldn't be an employee of a railroad, or they couldn't hire a firm that you own, essentially. And the third point is that you can't get free things from any of these forbidden companies. So let's just say your father works for the railroad, he can't give you a free pass if it's not available to the public. Or if you're an employee, and they give you that for free, right? So, is that a good enough overview? Okay. So I just want to make sure that Mr. Van Keen and Mr. Carlamere, do you guys challenge these sections in any way? Do you think that they're reasonable?
It's the statute. The statute speaks for itself.
Okay. Before we hire employees or before candidates are allowed to be on the ballot, is there a vetting process? Does anyone check that there are no conflicts of interest?
I can't answer that.
Well, I'm asking that as
You just grouped employees with politicians.
Okay, so let's start with employees. For appointees and employees, do we check?
Do we check for?
If they're in violation of this section.
If there is a section or a violation,
Well,
we address once it's
HR, imagine if there was any.
We're a civil service community, so we go through, our hiring is within the confines of the Department of Personnel.
Okay, so let's talk about appointees and politicians. And let's just even assume once they're elected, before they're sworn in, or once they're appointed before they're sworn in, does anyone check their background? Okay, I'll assume that's a no.
Josh, I'll be honest with you. I'm listening to every question you're answering. I personally, Dan Hutchison, never look at any of this stuff, me personally. I'm trying to figure out how I would.
Well, I'm going to assume here, and maybe I'm naive, but that would be your job, Mr. Carlamere, or someone's job, is to make sure if the Faulkner Act says you can't do X, that our elected officials and our appointed officials and our employees don't do X.
You know, what's jumping out to me is this. The Supreme Court of the United States will only hear an issue which is ripe to be heard. The questions that you're asking are hypothetical in nature, and it would be easier for us if we were to be faced with a situation and render an opinion on an exact situation.
So let's talk about something specific. Let's just say there are elected and appointed officials who are in violation of these two sections of the Faulkner Act. What do we do? What's the resolution of this?
Can you give us an example of who is in violation, Jim?
I absolutely will.
Okay.
But can you just, I want to hear from you.
You're walking us down this path that we are patiently waiting. Just give us the example.
I promise you will get the payout, but I want to hear from you, Mr. Carlamere. What happens when it's discovered that someone is in violation of the Faulkner Act?
Issues go to the Trenton Local Finance Board, Department of Community Affairs.
Okay? So as a citizen, what do I do? Do I send a letter to the clerk? Do I call the DCA? What's the, do you as a governing body take action?
Take either of those three courses. You can call the clerk, you can call council, you can call Trenton Direct.
Okay? Are you aware of any conflicts of interest that violate the Faulkner Act? Have you gotten any, what's that? I'm almost there, Dan. Have you gotten any opinions or have you gotten any waivers for this? Have you spoken to anyone about the DCA? Okay. Because after reading about this, after reading the section of the Faulkner Act, I went to the financial disclosure forms. Spent approximately 5 minutes, and I found 2 violations. One I think is kind of minor. One is pretty severe. I actually was on the phone earlier today with the DCA. I didn't mention the name of my town or the name of the people, but asking for an opinion on what to do. Now they're going to the League of Municipalities Convention tomorrow, so I'm probably not going to hear from them for a couple of days or until next week. But the 2 individuals that I found, and these are documented. The first is Arlene Trumendo. I never met her. She sits on the zoning board. Her spouse is employed by PSE&G. That is one of the forbidden, well, actually for 2 reasons, because it's a gas work and a power plant. And just so we're clear, I will read the actual section of the Faulkner, and this is the second half of 163. And no such officer or employee shall be interested directly or indirectly in any contract or job for work or materials or the profits thereof to be furnished or performed for any person operating any interurban railway, street railway, gas works, water works, electric light or power plant, heating plant, telegraph line, telephone exchange, or other public utility within the territorial limits of such municipality.
Josh, can you go back on that for me for a second?
Officer or employee.
Sure.
Can you, at the very beginning, you said operating? Can you reread that for me, please?
Sure, I'll start from the very beginning. No officer or employee elected or appointed in any municipality shall be interested directly or indirectly in any contract or job for work or materials or the profits thereof to be furnished or performed for the municipality. And then that's where it turns into what I had already read. And no such officer or employee shall be interested directly or indirectly in any contract or job for work or materials or the profits thereof to be furnished or performed for any person operating an interurban railway, meaning trains.
Do you know what her husband does at PSE&G, Mr. Berry?
I have no idea.
So you're just coming out and making a statement that that could be in violation?
Correct. And my concern
Can you
here,
check that for us?
yeah, well, I've got another one.
Okay.
And my concern here is that we've got exposure as a town. Obviously, we're talking about Faulkner violations. We're talking about people who are, who may not be qualified to run for office, and something has to be remediated. But I want to focus on the, at the end of this, it mentions telephone exchange or other public utility within the territorial limits of such municipality. I'm defining a other public utility as someone that's governed by the Board of Public Utilities. Do you agree with that assessment?
I'll leave that up to Mr. Carlamere to give us an opinion on that when he reviews that.
Okay, Mr. Carlamere, can you give an opinion?
I'll review it. I mean, that's, if I had information that you were making this inquiry, I would have reviewed it prior to the meeting, but I'll review it and respond to Council President and Council.
Okay, well, the second individual happens to work for Comcast, which is both a telephone exchange and a public utility that is regulated by the Board of Public Utilities. Mr. David Mayer, who's mayor, he is the New Jersey Director of Legislative Affairs for Comcast, an employee. As an employee of Comcast, and I was one, so I know this as an insider, there is stock and profit sharing, as well as courtesy services as a Comcast employee, which are not available to the general public. So I want to make sure that Mrs. DeJoyce gets my letter. Again, I've already reached out to the DCA. I will be hearing back from them. But I'm requesting that this is remediated as soon as possible because of the potential exposure that our town has. Having a mayor who may not be eligible to be mayor and a zoning board member who may not be eligible to sit in the zoning board.
Have you made a written communication with local finance board, DCA?
Via email. But I have not mentioned names or towns. She was going to get back to me with what's the remediation.
Who did you speak to, Mr. Barry?
I honestly did not write down her name. She's the one that when you send the email to, she's the one who responds. She's the equivalent of the secretary or the clerk. I don't know if I have the full name here of the man who she would be talking to. No. But I did speak to the local finance part of the DCA. Again, this is something that I think is pretty serious and needs to be addressed. In addition,
If I work for a landscaper, and the landscaper does the fields, does the baseball fields, does that mean I can't run for public office?
according to Faulkner, it does.
Doesn't that seem kind of crazy?
Well,
Can't I recuse myself on issues dealing with the landscaping contracts?
I am not in judgment of Faulkner. This is what Faulkner says.
Sometimes we look at things and we have to say, does that sound right?
Well,
I have news for you, that don't sound right.
maybe it doesn't sound right, but you're counsel. You're about law and order. Our police enforce the laws.
I'm not asking about equitable, I'm just saying that your interpretation.
My
just
interpretation?
doesn't sound right.
I'll be honest, I was surprised that telephone
Well,
exchange was up here.
the interpretation you're implying might not be the correct interpretation.
That's what I'm saying.
I don't know. That's why I'm saying I am not calling on the mayor to step down. I am not calling him to quit.
So if I worked for the Sixers, let's say I provided security for the Sixers at their basketball games, okay? The Sixers are owned by Comcast.
Not anymore.
Well, if they were still owned by Comcast. Now I can't run for political office in this town?
The Sixers are a little different because they're a subsidiary. Comcast Cable has got, and phone, has got a footprint in Gloucester Township. On top of that, a telephone exchange, of which Comcast is. When I spoke to this woman at the DCA, and again, my apologies for not writing her name down, and I mentioned PSE&G and Comcast, yep, it sounds like a conflict. But she has to get back to me, which is why I wrote her, and again, this was mid-morning today, and I just haven't heard back. If you're asking, is it fair, is it right?
No, I'm not asking that.
The way that this happened, if you're curious about New Jersey history, I suggest you read the Municipal Madness book that was put out a number of years ago, where it talks about how the railroads corrupted much of the state. And so these utilities would literally put their employees and their people in the council and mayor's office, and then the zoning boards would get exactly what they wanted. It's my opinion in reading this that this was an answer to that. Why would you ban all these public utilities, especially the telegraph line? I mean, that's fairly arcane language. A heating plant, right? I don't think anyone uses steam heat anymore. The fact of the matter is that's the law. And my expectation is that whether it's Mr. Carlamere or someone is going to be proactive to make sure that our highest elected official, who, you know, he's over the police force over everything, is the mayor, David Mayor Council team, is not a violation of the Faulkner Act. And to me, that's